Brian Stevenson. I'm Collections and Program Manager here at the Santa Bárbara Mission Archive-Library. Today I'd like to share with you a little bit about the art and architecture of the church here at Mission Santa Barbara. But we're not actually in the church at Mission Santa Barbara right now, we're at the Santa Bárbara Mission Archive-Library. The reason for that is I want to share with you one of the volumes from the collection here of the Archive Library. This book is in our rare books collection. It's a copy of a book called De Architectura that was originally produced in ancient Rome by an author called Vitruvius. This is kind of like the book of classical architecture, and it was in the collection that the friars had here at the mission when they were building the church in the early part of the 19th century. There's a couple of things here that I want to share with you so that when we go into the church in a little bit, you can reference them and see where they came from here in the book originally. So firstly, I want to draw your attention to this 10th plate here. And you can see this very classical style, right? You have the Ionic columns. In the front, it looks like a Greek or a Roman temple, right? I want you to remember this when we go into the front of the church, when you're looking at the facade of the church as it was built in the early part of the 19th century. And again, here's another example of that sort of classical style that would be revisited in the 19th century by the Chumash artists and the friars when they were building the church. I also want to share with you this image here of this winged forked lightning bolt, because that is also going to come into play when we go to the church when we're looking at the ceiling for some of the ornamentation that you can see on the ceiling of the mission church. So remember these images when we go to look at the church in just a second. Remember when we were inside in the archive, we looked at those pictures of the facade of the church and you saw the columns and it looked very classical, like an old Greek or Roman temple. Well, when you look at the facade of our church that was built in 1820, you can see those same elements coming through. You can see the kind of Ionic columns with those little curlicues at the top, and then you can see that triangular bit at the top that looks just like a Greek temple. So we have this neoclassical structure that was built in 1820 because they were using images from the book that they found in their library here at the mission. So now we're inside the mission church here at Mission Santa Barbara. And remember, when we were looking at that Vitruvius book, I pointed out that element that I said was going to be on the ceiling in the ornamentation, the winged forked lightning. Well, you can see that here on the ceiling of the church where the chandeliers are. So these elements were being pulled right from the copy of Vitruvius's De Architectura, and the Chumash artists that were designing the decoration of the interior went ahead and they took those elements right from the book and they put them on the ceiling. So we've been seeing a lot of these elements, these neoclassical architectural elements that were coming from Vitruvius. But remember that this book was just what the friars handed over to Chumash artists as the reference point for what the friars wanted the church to look like. Everything that we have seen has been executed and carried out by Chumash artists who were using this kind of European style, but they made it their own by implementing their own artistic elements, color, design, and so on. So what we're seeing in the architecture of the Mission Church is this real wonderful kind of coming together of two cultures. You have sort of native indigenous Chumash art and culture, and you have this kind of European Franciscan Christian culture that are melding together here in the Mission Church.